Amy Impellizzeri is a former corporate litigator and multi-award-winning author, and her newest novel is In Her Defense, which we'll talk about in today's show. Amy is also the host of the I Know How This Book Ends podcast. Don't go away, we'll be right back.
Thanks for having me on your live show. It was really my pleasure. Your production is just fantastic. Unbelievable how you guys are pulling that off. So organized with segments and transitions and all those different things. Right in line with what I'm talking about in my new book, Going Live streaming your podcast to reach more people. Hopefully people tune in for our conversations. Definitely worth the on-demand version, in my opinion, if I may say so myself. You guys are awesome.
I think this might be, I've been on over 24 different podcasts and radio shows in the last couple of months, and this has to be one of the most sophisticated, what the kids that I used to teach call bomb.com shows and presentations that I've ever been on. It looks fantastic. Thank you.
I love your introduction. How professional. That sounds, I feel like I'm on a beautiful show here.
Folks, welcome.
Available wherever great books are sold near you.
Oh my goodness, Ross, thank you so much.
Thanks. And, this is one of the most fun interviews that I've ever done. So thank you, Bridgetti.
Big pleasure. Ross, take care.
Thank you.
Hi there and welcome. You are watching Books with Bridgetti, where storytellers feel right at home. I'm your host, Bridgetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa, and our live stream is made possible by StreamYard and BeLive Media, helping you make great connections and meet some amazing authors from around the world. We are joined today by an audience on Amazon Live, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So wherever you're joining us from, a hearty warm welcome to you today. Our amazing guest is Amy Impellizzeri, and it's the first time that you're watching the show today. Feel free to let us know, and we would be to give you a shout out. I do know that my guest is having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so she will be joining us shortly. Technology sometimes gets in the way, but that is just how things go. So we'll just give her a moment, and I'm sure she's going to be joining us soon. But one of the things we are very, very passionate about is helping us level up on their live streams. And there's a few things that can do, because, you know, I think for the foreseeable future, people are still going to be using a video moving forward, and authors as well, you know, when trying to talk about their books and do book promotions. I don't think we're going to be getting rid of video anytime soon. So there's just a couple of things that we can help you, ways in which we can help you to level up your online appearance when you are promoting your books. And one of the things we suggest is that if your camera, you know, if you don't a good laptop and your camera is a bit fuzzy, invest in a webcam. And one of the webcams that I highly recommend is the Logitech range. Anything in the Logitech range will be fantastic. Personally, I use the Logitech Brio, and a lot of the people in the streaming community that I know use the Logitech Brio as well if you don't have a DSLR. But the most important thing is that people can actually hear you. And so what you want to do is invest in a lapel microphone like the Rode lavalier, for example, or I use the Samsung, which is a bigger microphone, but it's also something that I recommend. But for the purposes of what you do, just go with a lavalier microphone. It'll make sure that people hear you nicely. And one of the things I always like to mention to people is that I know a lot of the authors use their phones to stream when they're promoting their books. Turn your phone into landscape, not in portrait mode, because if you see those sort of black sides on your screen, it's because your phone is in portrait mode, which is great for something like Instagram. But if you're going live on the other platforms, do turn it into landscape. And then you've got a bigger real estate to see, and can also see your book. So again, our amazing guest today is Amy, and she's a former corporate litigator. She's a tall poppy author and host of the I Know How This Book Ends podcast. She's a multi-award-winning author. And her newest book that we want to talk about today is called In Her Defense. So if you are on Amazon Live, her book is in the carousel. Please do that. And if you've got questions for Amy while we are live, please feel free to do so. Amy is also the past president of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, a faculty member at the Drexel University's Creative Writing Program, and she is frequently invited to speak at legal conferences and writing workshops. Let's not waste any more time and invite Amy to join me. Amy, welcome to the show. I am so pleased you Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Amy, I'm going to start off by asking you, can you tell the audience something about yourself that they won't find out from reading the book? Because we're going to talk about the book in a minute, but can you tell us something that they won't know about you?
Well, I guess what they won't know is that this is a long journey back to my roots. This book is a legal defense book, but I am, almost a decade into my writing career after a 14-year legal career. I left my legal career and I didn't leave to start writing books, but that's what happened. And for a long time, I wrote nothing that was related to the law. And people would always say to me, well, you were a lawyer, why don't you write like legal fiction or legal thrillers? And I think I was too close to it. And so it took me almost a decade of sort of walking away from the law, walking away from that part of my journey and creating this new journey until I was ready. And it was really during the pandemic that I was doing a lot of reflecting on my past chapter and my current chapter and my future chapter. And I decided that I was ready to return to my roots in a sense. So this book, In Her Defense, is the companion project this year to a nonfiction book that I wrote that's coming out actually in the fall called How to Leave the Law. And so I feel like this is actually like a little bit of a collision with my of my chapters, past, current, and future, all sort of colliding together this year. Yeah.
Wow, gosh, that's absolutely amazing. I think a lot of people, I can certainly relate to what you said, because I live with an invisible disease or diseases and chronic pain, and when I first started live streaming, my idea at that time was to be able to use this to create awareness of people who live with invisible disease and chronic pain. And what I found was that it was harder than I thought. And I didn't go into that path. 7 years into my career, I'm now feeling more empowered and ready to venture into that. So something I'm investigating. But it's amazing how long it takes one to bridge that gap, to get over that hurdle. And like you, I think a big part of the shift, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, happened during the pandemic. I don't know what it is, but I think it created a lot of shifts in people all over the world from what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I
And-
totally agree with that.
And once you were able to, I want to ask you, what did it feel like once you completed the book and you had to let it go? Because a lot of people say they struggled with that. What was it like for you?
Yeah, that is a struggle for me too, for sure. It's a big moment of vulnerability to let go of it, and it's never it's never finished. I always laugh when I teach at Drexel University in the master's in creative writing program, and I talk to my students a lot about what finished means, right? And finished is a relative term, and even when you hand in your finished draft to your mine goes to my agent first, and she's very editorial, and then eventually it goes to my editor. And even when you hand it into your editor, there's still things that happen afterwards. And what I found, because In Her Defense is actually my 6th novel, but I found that even after it reaches readers' hands, it's not really finished, in that your readers bring their perspective, they bring their viewpoint to reading the book. And I love talking with readers. I love going to book clubs, live and virtually. I love hearing the perspectives they bring to the various stories. And so sometimes, oftentimes, those perspectives will help me see the words and the story and the characters in a new light. So actually, I think realizing that has come to sort of help me let go of it a little bit, because really writing for me is an activity of connection. It's about connecting with people, about connecting with readers, connecting with their stories. And so I think that it is hard for me, but that's how I've sort of rationalized it for myself.
And now you've actually decided to turn it into a legal series. How did that come about?
Well, that was a very early on decision, because there were 2 books. There were several books sketched out, but there were 2 books that I was writing at the same time. And I realized that they were 2 sets of characters, but they really could be part of the same series. And the series is the River's Edge Law Club series. And so each book is meant to address and talk about a new set of characters and a new trial, a new legal issue. But all of it revolves around one place, the River's Edge Law Club, which is in the town of River's Edge, which is a fictional New York town, but it is supposed to be sort of a commuter town outside of Manhattan. It's described as 4 express train stops away from Manhattan, but it's really, it's sort of like a town that looks like, has all the appearances of being a small town outside of Manhattan. It's got a main street and 1 post office and 1 library, and sort of has all these like sort of trappings of a small town, but it's really just impersonating a small town, because it really is a sort of transient commuter place, a commuter town to Manhattan. And while a lot of communities might be known for their biotech communities or their financial districts or their flagship stores, River's Edge is known for its lawyers. It's the place where a lot of lawyers live, and they commute in and out of Manhattan. And the River's Edge Law Club is this sort of physical place. It's sort of similar in appearance and kind of mission to maybe a country club or a bar association club. But it's the place where all sorts of backdoor dealings and things happen. And so, of course, in the context of that, there's corruption and secrets and all sorts of things. So the series is grounded in the River's Edge Law Club in River's Edge, but the series is really about a different group of people navigating that same kind of inner workings world. And so, like I said, I was writing these two stories at the same time. I wasn't sure really for a long time which was going to be the lead off story. And then In Her Defense rose to the kind of the top of being the lead off story. And it is. And now the second book that I was writing at the same time is going to be coming out next spring, bar none.
So did you write the book from the perspective that if a legal person or an attorney were to read the book, that they would kind of go, yep, yeah, I can relate to that, you know, or was it not intended for anyone in the legal profession? I mean, did you write with a kind of accuracy that they would relate to?
Well, here's the thing. I wanted it to be accessible to everyone. I didn't want it to be something that would only appeal to lawyers. And there is a little bit, I have taken a little bit of liberties with the legal courtroom scenes, but it was important to me for a lawyer to read it and not throw it down and say, oh my gosh, that could never happen. Like I wanted you to be able to suspend disbelief a little bit and have a little bit of accessibility. But I'll tell you, for example, originally River's Edge, because River's Edge is a fictional town, but it's based loosely, just appearance-wise, not in terms of the corruption or the backdoor politics, but just appearance-wise, it's based loosely on a town that I lived in for a short time, which is Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is a commuter town to Manhattan and is over the river from Manhattan. And so originally I thought it would be River's Edge, New Jersey. And then I realized that New Jersey civil procedure or criminal procedure had some things that were going to really screw up my story. It wasn't going to work because just different things that would have happened before the trial, the arraignment procedures, the bail procedures. As I realized, wait a minute, this has to be a town in New York. I don't want a lawyer to read this and say that's not New Jersey criminal procedure. So now then I took the town and I placed it in New York. And then that was fun too, because it was already a commuter town to Manhattan. So there were things like that I thought I didn't want a lawyer to say, oh my goodness, that's so unrealistic. I wanted a lawyer to sort of, be nodding along, but I certainly wanted it to be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, that sounds, I've had a lot of authors, I think you're the first author that I'm interviewing that's in that has a legal background. No, I'm lying.
Don't do that.
I'm totally lying. I think Mitch Jackson is going to butcher me for saying that. Because he doesn't write about the legal profession. He writes about using live streaming technology in your profession as a lawyer. So that's more his niche.
Yes.
So he doesn't write novels and that kind of stuff. He's more into the techie stuff and how that can help attorneys. So your storylines, is it, your characters, are they completely fictional, or did you base it on stories or aspects of the story is real from past cases?
So the case itself is completely imagined, but the characters have some basis in reality, and this is how. So when I first left the law, I moved from New York to Pennsylvania, and I was a little bit of a fish out of water, and I was had young children, and I was starting my life over, basically on sabbatical from the only profession I was ever going to practice, trying to figure out what my next chapter was going to be, starting to write for the first time. And I have 3 children, and my middle son was starting preschool, and he made fast friends in this new town where we knew no one. He made fast friends with this little boy, and they became very good friends. And I sought out the little boy's mother. I couldn't wait to meet her because my son would come home talking about this little boy. And when I met her at a school event, she said to me, "Oh, I've heard a lot about you too. I've been excited to meet you too." She and I became fast friends as well in my new town in a place where I knew no one. And she seemed to be a little untethered too. And we really bonded, and we had a lot of, we had just spent a lot of time together. And eventually after about 6 months of friendship, she told me that she had a secret that she wanted to share with me, something that she really didn't share with anybody at school, that some of the dads recognized her, but certainly she tried to keep it on the down low. And that was that her husband managed a very well-known exotic dance establishment in town, and that she worked there. And when she told me, I was so, I just said to her, like, I was so gracious. I really don't share this with a lot of people, but I feel I can trust you. And when she told me, I was like, I'm so honored that you shared this with me. And she was like, I don't want this to change anything. And I'd known her, we knew each other by then, right? And our boys were really close. And I was like, of course it's not going to change anything, and we're still going to be friends. And so like I received it in that way, but something changed between us, and we could not regain our footing in our friendship, and our friendship fell away, and we are not in touch, and we weren't in touch after that. And our boys, and my son ended up going to another school, not because of that, but so then the boys fell away from each other. She and I fell away from each other, and I never really, and I would see her sometimes in town, and she would just like look away, like she didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I always felt badly about how that friendship fell apart. It was such a impactful one for me. And it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted to sort of explore a story between two women, like the women that we were in that scenario, whose friendship fell apart. Because I think, first of all, I think love stories are wonderful and fascinating, right? And breakups of romantic love stories are interesting to explore. But the breakdown of female friendship, I mean, to me, the female friends that I've lost in my life, that's been like a terrible heartbreak, right? Like the worst kinds of heartbreak. And so I feel like exploring those stories was very important to me. So when I decided to write about these two women, I thought about that story, and I thought about putting that in the context, and obviously everything else that comes later. These two women, one is a lawyer who's stepped away from the law and comes back to the law to represent her former friend. That is a completely imagined scenario, not based in reality. But the idea that a female friendship could break down so dramatically, and that it would have these ripple implications for the women and their children, was something that I was inspired to explore based on that friendship.
Oh my gosh. Amy, I'm kind of almost holding back the tears here because.
Oh. Well, I feel that too when I talk about it, because she and I are not in touch, and people have asked me that. And I mean, to me, there is a piece of this story that is a love letter to her if she were to ever pick it up, because it is my hope to tell the other woman's story in a different light than happened to me in reality.
Wow, this hits so close to home for me. It's almost scary.
Really,
I don't think people talk about that often. People talk about the heartbreak of a relationship between a man and woman being hard, but to me, in my experience, it was harder, way harder. Yeah. Because I think the connection and the kinship that you have with another woman is like a next level relationship.
Totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's very devastating. And there's often a level of intimacy between women that is, not easily replicated in other relationships.
I don't know of anyone who's really sort of thought about, written about it in the way that you just mentioned now. And I think it definitely is something worth exploring, because I think it's an unwritten thing that a lot of women have experienced. But nobody really talks about it, and possibly because it's so hard. It's really just incredibly hard, Yeah. It's really taken me almost a decade to get over the breakup of a close relationship with a friend, because
Yeah.
it hurts that deeply. You know,
Yeah.
it really shook me to my core that I didn't feel I could ever get into that kind of relationship with another woman again, because it just hurt so much.
I've spoken with people about that in other contexts, but also now in the context of this book, since the book does explore such a dramatic breakdown between two women. And I think one of the things somebody had mentioned to me at a book club or at a signing is that often the problem is when a romantic relationship breaks down, there's never just one reason, but there are reasons that you can sort of articulate. But often when a female and to a friendship or a female relationship breaks down, then the reasons are so nuanced and completely different for the two women. And that is what is so often so hard to, because it's so hard to articulate and it's so hard to put it in a little box. It's often really hard to recover from.
And you mentioned something about the, you know, writing from the perspective of the other person. And I think that is often where the difficulty lies, is being able to recognize the perspective of the other person.
Right.
You know, and sometimes I found that there's always one person in the relationship that has invested a lot more
Yes.
than the other one, you know, and that's why it hurts so deeply. And sometimes you find the other person almost walks away with not the kind of emotions that you had at all, you know, and you're thinking like, did we really have a friendship? Like, what happened?
Yeah. Well, and that's part of the, and that's certainly something that it happens in her defense with Ingrid and Oprah. They have two completely different realities. They have two different versions of reality, or two different narratives, really. And so even if there was a seemingly equal meeting of the minds, when the narrative just veers so dramatically off for the two women, yeah, that can be, maybe perspectives change, and yeah, maybe it's a matter of one person investing more overall, or one person stopping their investment earlier on, and then they find it easier to walk away. But yeah,
and complex, you know, because when your children have been friends as well, and you know,
yes.
there's just so many issues to delve into. Talk a little bit about the cover of the book. Have you got the copy of the book there? I want to just, if you can just hold it up. The cover is gorgeous. My goodness.
I love this cover. Yeah, I love this cover so much. Yeah, and I saw a bunch of cover concepts. I was so excited about this one. I loved the red shoes. I loved the Papa Red. I love that she sort of looks like she's standing on a river. That felt like a really fun start to the River's Edge series. And yeah, I love it. It's definitely going to be, you'll see, we're going to be releasing the cover for Bar None soon. That cover is final, and it's very much on brand with this one. It will look very nice looking next to this, but also it's got its own personality,
So
matches.
did you come up with a concept for the cover, or did you get someone to do that for you?
Yeah, my publisher did it. I am terrible at coming up with concepts. I only know what I don't like. So I never know really what to ask for. But I just, luckily people who are smarter and better at this than me will put together a bunch of concepts, show them to me, and then I'm like, nope, yes, that, but with tweaks. So, and actually on this, my agent was really very helpful. She's very good at this. And so when we got the concepts, we talked through them together, and she had some really fabulous insights. So I was just really excited about this one.
And I know I'm very partial to red because, you know, it's my brand color, but I really like the shade of red on the, you know, it's a deep, impressive, powerful color. And, you know, just seeing that little bit of the bottom of the the shoe. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that kind of just nails it.
I know. I absolutely love it, and we kept that for the second one too. I'll give you a little hint in that the second book in the series, which is excerpted, in if you get a copy of In Her Defense, in the back is an excerpt of the next book, which is called Bar None, and that book is it's Bar None is about this law firm. It's about a woman working at a law firm called Bar Knoll, which is named for its larger-than-life founder. And so Bar Knoll is a big character in the book, but still the series is very female-centric. And so that book follows the story of Carly Jenner, who we meet in Her Defense towards the end of the book. And so when I got cover concepts for Bar Knoll, there were both men and women pictured on the cover. And I was like really struck, like, no, it has to be a woman on the cover of this book, even though I understand like Bar None is a male dominated law firm. And maybe that's interesting to have like a change it up from In Her Defense. I was really adamant that I wanted women on the covers of these books. So we do have a woman on the cover of this book, and I love this cover. The cover is really very edgy, and I'm very excited about it.
So
There we go.
when do you plan to release it? Is that still under wraps a little bit?
It will probably be next month, August. So you can keep an eye on my social media channels, and also if you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll be among the first to know.
So I always love asking this question, and I refer to books that were released during the pandemic as pandemic books.
Yes.
What was it like releasing that book in this pandemic period? Because it's so different from the releases that was done pre-pandemic, because it was done completely differently. You know, you were doing in-person events, going to libraries, doing public readings, meeting people in person. What was that experience like for you, being able to release a book during the pandemic and not having the freedom to in-person events?
So I had kind of an interesting introduction to what that would be like, because I actually released before In Her Defense, my last book came out in March of 2020. It came out the first week of March of 2020, if you can believe.
Just when the pandemic started.
Yes. And it was called I Know How This Ends. And it was set against the backdrop of something that never happened. It was set against the backdrop of a crowded commencement ceremony at Carnegie Hall in New York in the spring of 2020. Something that never happened, right? There were no live commencement ceremonies in 2020. And so the book releases, and I actually went to a live event. I had a live like pre-launch party in the Hamptons the week before the book launched. That was my last live event before everything shut down. And then came home and the book released, and we shut down the tour, and we did no live events for that book, right? And also the book is out there, and it is set against the backdrop of something completely surreal, right? So now I'm like trying to talk about that book on live event on Zoom events, and the book does have like a time bending element to it. It does have a parallel universe element to it, which ended up being really great, because now we literally are talking about a parallel universe that never occurred, and made for some really interesting conversations. But my point was, everything shifted for that book online quickly. And so I got a little taste of what that felt like. And so actually by the time, and then In Her Defense was my pandemic book that I wrote during the pandemic. And so by the time it came out this spring, I was able to schedule a couple of live events. So I was able to schedule a indie bookstore event, a large bookstore event, a Barnes and Noble event, and a library event. And I have a couple other little events like that. But obviously, mostly everything has still been online Zoom book clubs. But I have gone to a couple of live book clubs, and I will go to more. And I'm going to my first conference in the fall, first live conference in the fall. Live conferences have started to be scheduled again and opened up again. So this book is kind of like bringing me out. I feel like I Know How This Ends kind of took me into the pandemic and everything shut down. And then this book is sort of bringing me out. So it's been easier. It's been easier than had I released a book in 2021 when everything was still completely unknown. So hopefully things will continue on the trajectory that we're on of getting better and easier and more open.
We
But
certainly.
I will say, and I've said this repeatedly since 2020, the silver lining of the pandemic is that there have been barriers that have opened, right? There have been avenues that have opened like this, where we can talk about books to audiences we were not able to reach before. And that is something that I hope doesn't go away.
I know. That's often what I say to people. You know, as awful as the pandemic was in many, many ways for many of us, because a lot of us lost dear loved ones during the pandemic. But there's also been a lot of positive shifts in the way that we interact with each other. I think because we have this shared massive loss that we've experienced together during the pandemic. We've seen huge shifts in the way that people work. You know, I mean, it was unthinkable before that you'd see the legal system move online outside of the courtroom. I mean, whoever would have thought that would happen, right?
Right.
And a lot of the way that the corporates have moved is, you know, previously employers kind of said, you know, forget it. And especially talking about women, you know, for me, the shift, especially for mothers, has been massive. Because employers said, you know, well, if we can't have a bum on the seat, you don't have a job. And so a lot of women gave up their corporate careers because of that mindset. And now we've had this shift where we've proven women actually do so much when they work from home. They know that their children are safe and they get the job done. They get it done. You know, so I love that shift that it's caused, and the manner in which it's empowered women in particular who can now say, I can do this because I've proven it to you during the pandemic and I don't want to go back to working in the office. You know, that to me is a massive, massive win. Talk to me about your podcast and how that came about.
Yeah, that came about during the pandemic because, so my last novel that was before the pandemic, before In Her Defense, was called I Know How This Ends. And because everything shifted online so quickly, and I had a lot of friends who did favors for me and helped promote the book. And as we shifted online, you know, just did different things. And I wanted to pay it forward. So I started an online book club. And at the time we didn't record it. It was strictly online. Whatever happens in book club stays in book club. And we called it I Know How This Book Ends. And I basically invited friends who had books coming out at that time to come on and promoted it through my newsletter base and social media. And we really had a lot of fun. And we started doing it. I think it was every week in the beginning. We started doing it every week or every other week. Now I'm sort of forgetting, but we had, and you know, the audience sort of shifted and changed. There were some people that showed up to many of them, but then others who were just came and went, and we had so much fun. And we had just so many fabulous authors on: Hank Phillippi Ryan, Candace Bushnell, Jennifer Hillier, Sarah Pekkanen, just so many authors. And so and then eventually, as I started getting back into writing, and I couldn't hold the podcast, or I couldn't hold the book club quite as frequently. It went down in frequency, and I was just doing kind of special events and through the pandemic. And I would loved to stay connected to it, but I didn't have the time to devote to it on a weekly basis anymore. And so Speak Studio, which is a startup company that produces podcasts, asked me to turn the book club into a podcast. And so we started that in 2021, and it was called I Know How This Book Ends podcast. And it's on hiatus for the summer, but we have recorded 2 seasons. The first season was like still a lot of paying it forward, of a lot of books that I was reading at the time that I wanted to promote that were already out. But the second season is largely new releases. So we basically would release the book. A lot of editors and publicists started sending me books early, and we basically timed the episodes to release on release day. So, the 2 episodes are really a good library shelf, a good bookshelf of like all my favorite books from these past 2 years, basically. And I am on hiatus for the summer because I've been working on 2 deadlines, but so this is a good time to get caught up. But we anticipate launching the 3rd season in the fall. And it's basically
Awesome.
an in-depth talk. It's usually 20-25 minute conversation with an author, and I try to do a little bit of a deep dive into the story behind the story. So it's meant to sort of reveal some things. My favorite thing is when they say, nobody's ever asked me that. You can tell you're a writer. Nobody else thought to ask me that. And I try to ask them things that won't be too embarrassing, but maybe I'll dig in there a little bit into the story behind the story.
Just a tiny little bit.
Yeah.
Amy, can I ask you, I don't know, do you have your book handy? Would you mind reading us just a little section from the book to give people a taste?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a little section that I do like to read at readings, so I thought I would pull that out. So just to give the setup for this, our characters are Ingrid Delorio and Opal Rowan. And Ingrid is a former lawyer who is now a podcast host. I will just mention, when I wrote this story, I was not a podcast host. Okay, so this was not autobiographical. I think I manifested that into existence. But Ingrid is her own character. She's fictional. And so Ingrid is a lawyer who has stepped away from the law. And her husband, this is how the story opens, her husband has just been found dead. And the suspect in custody is a former friend of Ingrid's, her former best friend. So all that to say, now Opal is planning the funeral. She's just found out her husband died, and she's planning the funeral. She has a young son, and okay, so she's got a young son, and she's planning the funeral for her late husband. After she makes some notes for the funeral director, Ingrid plans her son's homeschooling lessons for the next few days, the way she has done for several years now. With his anxiety, she has become used to sheltering him, and now she will need to protect him fiercely from what will come next. His father is dead. There is a murder investigation and a suspect in custody. And the troubling thing is that the suspect is a woman her son knows, a woman who used to be his mother's friend. The mother of a boy who used to be Drake's own friend, as a matter of fact. When he finally uses his words, he will most certainly have questions for Ingrid. And the truth is, Ingrid has plenty of her own, but those will have to wait. She resolves to be patient and try to manage Drake's anxiety so he doesn't have a major setback. While she is homeschooling Drake to accommodate his anxieties, Ingrid is also doing it for her. The pressure of those school moms for the short or long, depending on how you looked at it, year that Drake was in traditional school was exhausting, and Ingrid was happy to leave them all behind. She tried out organized sports a few years later, but that too had been short-lived. Actually, a brief stint in t-ball last year nearly killed them all. Ingrid recalls with a shudder as she adds, buy a funeral dress to her list. She doesn't want to wear anything she already owns to the funeral. She wants to buy something suitable, wear it once, and throw it away. Ingrid turns back to her list and optimistically adds, prepare invoices for next month's sponsors. In spite of the chaos she now finds herself living in, she needs her podcast to stay afloat. When she is behind her microphone, she feels powerful. She's sought out nationally for her connections and her tips, and she relishes the acknowledgement and acceptance. Ironically, the national acceptance she's come to enjoy hasn't exactly translated into local recognition. She has had her face on national magazines, including Women's World and Inc., but she's still a relative unknown in her own little town, as demonstrated by the anonymity she experienced just this morning. While she's making lists and notes at the kitchen table, Ingrid ignores a missed call. It's not a number she recognizes, and she doesn't answer unknown calls in the first ring. She gets a lot of cold calls from her podcast. She has no friends or family of her own calling to check in on her, just a continued stream of calls wanting to be part of her podcast, which is called Too Busy to Die. Ingrid lets it go to voicemail, making a mental note to check it later. While she resents the intrusiveness of strangers on her grief-filled nights, she can't abandon her business. Too Busy to Die is an award-winning and highly downloaded podcast of tips and tricks with guests who collaborate with Ingrid to help promote both Ingrid's podcast and their own respective businesses. There is robust advertising revenue, and each guest pays to be on the show, and that pay-to-play revenue is what makes Too Busy to Die profitable. Ingrid started the business with zero capital when she left her career practicing law in New York City, and it's become incredibly successful, especially in the last few years, allowing her to work profitably alongside raising and homeschooling her son. Sure, she's had some help along the way, but Ingrid prefers to ring the bell of a self-made entrepreneur. She's worked hard, taken advantage of certain opportunities, grown the business, and it's all worked out spectacularly. She doesn't see why any of that has to change just because Peter's gone. He wasn't the least bit involved in the business when he was alive. He wasn't involved with any Ingrid's life during months and years, in fact. Ingrid's mind races as she realizes she needs to figure out how to keep making her life work now that she's a single mother. She may, in fact, need her business even more now that she is a widow and on her own. After all, Peter didn't believe in insurance. Ingrid has always known this. He believed he'd live forever, and so there was no reason for betting against himself. With her son asleep upstairs, his lessons for the next few days complete, and a few productive notes about the podcast going forward, Ingrid resolves to continue to avoid her empty bed, the loneliness of night, and the grip of grief. She fills a goblet of wine and turns on the television, not thinking about the fact that it will be time for the news and that Peter is actually the big local news story of the day. As the television springs to life, Ingrid gasps as she realizes a commentator is talking about her husband who was found dead at a vacant building lot the night before. They show a picture of him pulled from his public LinkedIn profile, and Ingrid flinches. She's not sure she wants to stare at his face right now, and so she reaches for the remote, but then the screen flashes a picture of Opal Rowan instead of Peter, and Ingrid leaves the television on. Ingrid stares at Opal's image, trying to recognize the woman she once knew, because yes, Ingrid knows her. The woman on the television, the woman that the television is saying killed her husband, was Ingrid's friend once, her best friend for a time, her only real adult friend ever. The news reporter has a lot of information about her. They say she is a former stripper with a seedy past who turned her life around and became a nurse in a small hospital in a neighboring town to River's Edge. Ingrid knows all of this, of course, but can't imagine what that has to do with murder charges against Opal. Surely they're not going to argue that strippers are inherently violent people. Ingrid rolls her eyes at the useless field reporter. We've just learned that Opal Rowan has refused the public defender. The reporter has perfect hair and makeup and is standing in front of Opal's home, a small, well-tended clapboard structure not easily visible in the dark background, except for bright yellow crime scene decorating the porch. Why is the house being labeled a crime scene? Peter didn't die there. Ingrid leans in closer to the television mounted on the wall and mouths the words the way she's seen Drake do sometimes when he has words in his mouth. Doesn't exactly muster comfort level to say them out loud. What does this mean exactly that Opal Rowan has refused the public defender? Ingrid nods along with the anchor. Yes, what does that mean? I'd like to know too. The field reporter answers them both. Well, it means that Opal Rowan needs both a lawyer and a defense if she wants to beat these charges, because for now, this ex-stripper with a questionable past is facing a first-degree murder charge. Back to you, Joe. Ingrid leans back into the couch, sips her wine, and watches the screen switch from Opal's front yard to a drug commercial. This is the news story, Opal's seedy past as a stripper and the fact that she needs a lawyer. As the warm buzz of alcohol takes over, Ingrid's thoughts become jumbled. Ingrid is a lawyer, but not really. She left her New York City law gig years ago, 8 years ago to be precise. Mere weeks before she gave birth to Drake, she turned the lights off on her Park Avenue law office and never looked back. She had no real plans other than to be Peter's wife and her new baby's mother. She wanted to dive fully and completely into these roles, and she hoped with the same intensity with which she'd practiced law and lived her life would just travel with her to motherhood, that she'd somehow transfer her tiger-like instincts from Park Avenue to the nursery. And in most respects, she has to admit, it's worked. She took to motherhood fiercely and hungrily. In fact, when Drake was born, Peter complained he wasn't sure how he felt about playing a close second to Drake. Ingrid bit her tongue to keep from telling him he wasn't a close anything. She would have hoped Peter would understand without her saying so, She was determined to be the kind of devoted parent she'd craved for a long time, and indeed the role of parenthood came to define her in a way that lawyering never had. But she's still technically a lawyer. She's paid her dues annually and kept up her accreditations. She's worked hard for her law degree. She always thought that maybe she'd need that tool in her back pocket for a rainy day. Could I help Opal? More wine, more confusion, and then a stark return from the confusion. Of course I won't help Opal. Opal is accused of killing my husband. Opal needs a lawyer, but it has to be someone else. Ingrid looks down at the phone then and remembers a missed call. She hits play, and turns out it's not a cold call or an influencer or a potential podcast guest, and it's not a stranger. It's a woman whose voice she recognizes instantly, even though the woman is whispering. It's Opal Rowan on the other end. Maybe you've heard, Ingrid. I'm at the police station. And it turns out it's like the movies, and I get one call. And you owe me, Ingrid. So you know what? I'd like that favor now.
Oh my gosh, it just gives me goose flesh.
So that's how it begins.
It is such a, I think the storyline is just so relatable to a lot of people out there. And I think that's just what I love about this book.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that's true.
Oh my gosh, Amy, thank you so much. This was just amazing, and I'd love to have you back when your book releases.
I would love that. Thank you so much. I would love that. Absolutely.
I want to just say a huge big thank you to our audience. And if you've just joined the broadcast now and you missed the bulk of this interview, you really just want to go back and watch the whole of this, because I have interviewed authors for 4 years, but this was just amazing.
Aw, thank you. You're so kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And again, a huge big thank you to our audience out there. Thank you for joining Books with Bridgetti. And if you are over on Amazon, please go and grab a copy of In Her Defense. It's an amazing storyline that I don't think it's just for women, because I think men can relate to the same kind of situation, because this happens amongst men as well. It's a very, very relatable storyline.
Yeah, I think that's true. I've heard that from men too, who pick it up and say to me, "Oh, I grabbed my girlfriend's copy. I grabbed my wife's copy," and I'm like, "It's okay. It's okay. You're allowed."
Yeah, it's definitely not just a woman's book. So go grab a copy of the book. Thank you for joining us, Amy. From the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you.
And to my audience, again, a huge big thank you and shout out to all of you for joining us today. And we'll see you back on the next episode of Books with Bridgetti. Take care and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
I think this might be, I've been on over 24 different podcasts and radio shows in the last couple of months. And this has to be one of the most sophisticated, what the kids that I used to teach call bomb.com shows and presentations that I've ever been on. It looks fantastic. Thank you for having me here.
Available wherever great books are sold near you.